This video brought to you by me.
Hi, my name is Eric and I'm a millennial. As with a lot of the rest of the generation, there are a lot of fandoms that I have a fondness for. One of the biggest being Ghostbusters. After all these years, we finally have the closest thing we're ever going to get to one of my biggest childhood dreams, a Ghostbusters 3 with Ghostbusters Afterlife. With Harold Ramis being dead, I'm curious about it, but I wouldn't call it one of my gotta-see upcoming movies. As we wait for it to be released, I can't help but think back to the last time a new Ghostbusters film came out. Now look, before we continue, I just want to make one thing clear. This is a discussion about Ghostbusters II, not the 2016 reboot. Not interested in seeing this comment section turn into a battleground. I personally did not care for the reboot, but that's neither here nor there with the topic at hand. Ghostbusters 2016, or as they seem to refer to it now, Ghostbusters Answer the Call, prompted a lot of heated discussion, and something I kept seeing from both sides was a dig at Ghostbusters 2. At least it wasn't as bad as Ghostbusters 2, or at least it tried something different, unlike Ghostbusters 2. I would see some sort of variation on this a lot. See, when I grew up, I had a bunch of the toys and would watch episodes of Real Ghostbusters, even Extreme Ghostbusters, on TV along with some of the VHS tapes. I drank Ecto Cooler like it was water, and rented the movies all the time. My family even kind of made fun of me for how much I rented them from the video store. Anyways, the point of all this is to illustrate how all Ghostbusters media was good when I was a kid, and that included both movies. We watched them both fairly regularly. To the point that it wasn't until after I went to college that I even became aware that Ghostbusters 2 was a film looked down upon by other people. When I was a kid, I viewed them as being about equal quality. As I got older, while the original film continued to be a great film, my rating for Ghostbusters 2 went down a bit, but I still enjoy it. And that seemed to be how everyone I knew felt. Or at least, if they didn't, they never bothered mentioning it to me, which would suggest that they at least didn't hate the movie. Because that's the thing, if you dislike the movie, I don't have anything against you. I can even fully understand your position, especially since the first movie is just that good. I just personally don't get people who are like, this is one of the worst sequels in history, or taints the franchise by its very existence. So I've rewatched it several times since learning how the public feels about the movie, and I just want to stick up for it. Champion a bit. So despite really liking this movie, I figure we should start off with the negatives of this, that I personally agree with. A, no movie is perfect, and B, maybe start off on the right foot for those who dislike the movie before I go over what I really like about this movie. Number 1, a remake of the first film's plot. I really can't argue around this in any way. Even when I was a little kid, didn't know anything about story structure or themes or any of that stuff, I still noticed this. And I think most of all the issues people have with this movie largely derive from this point. It's a remake sequel. I've seen some try to argue this, but it is. Quick, which film am I talking about? Peter, Ray, and Egon start off the movie not as Ghostbusters, but still studying the paranormal, though not respected by the public at large. Dana Barrett has a supernatural encounter and contacts them as they begin to research her case. Peter taking an immediate romantic interest with her as Dana at first seems lukewarm, eventually gets closer with him. The three, without Winston, have an adventure busting the supernatural before a montage of their ghost-busting business picks up, playing over a catchy song, with Winston joining in on the proceedings from that point onward. The big bad from past times forcibly recruits a wormy guy who has an interest in Dana, who herself serves as a major part of the villain's plan. The government refuses to believe their warnings. We have another montage of ghosts overrunning the city. Ghostbusters are locked up before the mayor decides to release them, / give them carte blanche to save the city. The bad guy needs a ceremony to unleash themselves onto the world. The climax involves a big giant thing walking through the city before stopping the bad guy, saving Dana while she and Peter officially get together and the wormy guy is returned to normal. The end credits play over the city celebrating the Ghostbusters. Yeah, there are differences, and some of the events I mentioned are in a slightly different order or recontextualized. Yeah, it's a really damn similar flow for a movie. And there's no reason this story had to be told this way. And while this is kind of disappointing, this isn't an inherently bad choice. It's just a choice. After all, Terminator 2 is also essentially a remake sequel, and it's considered to be one of the best sequels ever. But it is something that I think most can agree upon that we all would have liked something a little bit more unique. Number 2, everyone just forgetting that ghosts exist. This is one of the things largely connected to the previous point. While making the first movie, director Ivan Reitman was the one to suggest that the film be a going into business story, essentially starting the audience in a place of familiarity before the weirder concepts take over. Thus, by the time we get to the kaiju-sized Marshmallow Man walking around, we don't question it. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if this was something he insisted on as a way to provide a similar story structure, instead of starting off things with Ghostbusters still being in business, doing their thing, which I think is how most people would have approached the story. So that's most likely why this is here, but it doesn't explain how. How did people forget ghosts are real, and an ancient god turning himself into a giant mascot to try and destroy the world? I can sort of buy someone from outside the city having this viewpoint, depending on what ghost activity is like outside of New York in the Ghostbusters universe. And maybe it could have been an interesting develop to have a ghost truther moment in the city. Despite how many ghosts we saw flying around the last city, New York is a big place, and law of averages says that there would be some people who lived through the events of the first movie but never themselves actually saw anything. Maybe that's my modern life of seeing these type of conspiracy theories in the real world showing through, and trying to justify this choice. Needless to say, it's an odd choice given the story's universe. Although while this is true, it doesn't break the movie for me, but I can get why for some viewers this is just something they can't get past. Number 3, toned down for kids. In the many documentaries about the making of Ghostbusters I, one very common observation is how the original film was never intended as a kids' film or franchise. It just happened to become that. Hence why we got the Ghostbusters smoking and cursing and of course the infamous blowjob scene. And that's true, this is a bunch of adult comics making a supernatural comedy intended for other adults. But as we all know, kids ended up becoming huge fans, so for Ghostbusters II, they were aware that there would be a lot of kids watching this time around. It's said that Ernie Hudson shaved his mustache to try and make himself match the cartoon better. It's definitely the only reason Slimer makes a return here. Again, I can't argue that this isn't a thing that definitely happened on this film, but like the last thing, it doesn't actually bother me. It's more of a neutral statement of fact. This movie was made for more of a general audience. Now the reason this is more of a neutral statement is because it still feels in keeping with the first film's humor. It's not like the first film was some R-rated raunchy comedy and the sequel turns itself into a Disney Channel movie. The naughtier jokes of the original film are pretty subtle and don't really draw attention to themselves. Even though they weren't going for it, they intentionally made a pretty good all-ages comedy for the first film. And even with all that, I've heard a number of people say how they find Ghostbusters 2 to be the scarier of the two. Like when Ghost Nanny Janos kidnaps Oscar, I got asked, did anyone else not make the connection that this was Janos when they watched this as kids? I thought it was just some random ghost henchman sent by Vigo. The scene where the slime comes out of the bathtub and tries to capture Dana and her baby, that scene really scared my little sister when I showed her these movies. And of course the decapitated heads in the subway scene, which looks like something out of a Indiana Jones scene. So those points, again, leave this common criticism not really affecting me all that much. But again, I could see how this could be a stronger sticking point for those who are really connected with the adult humor vibe of the first film. Now, let's talk about what this film does right. Number 1, good jokes and quotes. This is one of those things that doesn't affect the overall quality of the film, but Ghostbusters is a comedic franchise, so I think it's worth mentioning. This feels about as quotable as the first movie. I know they talk about how the first film everyone was working towards the common good of the movie and the actors would not only improvise, but when they came up with an amazing joke, but felt it would work better if someone else got the line, a lot of them went to Peter, they would do that. In this film, the actors were apparently more inclined to keep the good improvs to themselves. Not surprising since Bill Murray got so big after the first movie, and for a sequel, they'd want to share in some of that. I wouldn't even be surprised if this wasn't even a conscious decision from the actors, assuming that this is all true. Still, point being, there aren't really any jokes that I can think of that stand out as an obviously Peter-style joke that for some reason Egon is delivering in a scene. I mean, they're all funny and they got their chance to make jokes in the last film. And to put it succinctly, funny is funny, and a lot of the jokes I think are really funny. It's all subjective, but by all means tell me, what are the groaner jokes in this movie? Because I don't see any. And believe me, I've seen plenty of bad comedy sequels with poor humor in my life, and Ghostbusters 2 is not one of them. Number 2. Good music. Like with jokes and quotes, this may seem kinda small potatoes in the grand scheme of things, but I have a real strong love for scores and soundtracks in movies. I truly think it's one of the most important tools in any filmmaker's arsenal, and sadly a lot of modern films don't seem interested in taking advantage of it. So I always like to mention it when I can. I know the popular opinion is that the score for the first film is great and the score for this film is a big step down. Again, it's one of those things I don't really see. Of course, the Ray Parker Jr. song is iconic and all kinds of fun, as it should be. But don't get me wrong, the Elmer Bernstein score to the first film is good, but never really wowed me like it does other fans. Randy Eldman is one of those composers I've always felt it was underappreciated. And while I wouldn't say this is as good as his Dragon the Bruce Lee story or Dragonheart scores, it still does what you need. I can't tell you how many times I think of the heroic cue from when they first approach the museum in the third act. And on top of all that, and a return of the Ghostbusters theme song, we also get a lot of good 90s songs playing throughout the montages. They may not be as memorable as the theme song, but they're catchy, and well, hey, you wouldn't want to overuse the Ghostbusters theme. Not saying one score is better than the other, but I see so many people butthurt about the music not being just more of the Elmer Bernstein score, and I felt like I should defend it. Number 3. Good use of their Moranis and other returning side characters. Now there's no real reason Louis Tully had to be brought back, but I'm sure glad he was. After all, it's Rick Moranis. Who doesn't love this actor? I mean, he's so amazing in the first film that he almost steals it from Bill Murray. And if you can be in a movie with Bill fucking Murray and almost steal the movie, that's pretty impressive. And it's not even like in a lot of sequels where they're just bringing back a funny character that everyone liked in the first movie just to have them repeat the same jokes. In fact, it's something really nice about the film in general. At no point is there a scene where the characters just stand around and redo the same joke with a slight variation, maybe one line from a character commenting on how weird it is we're doing the same gag again. For a comedy sequel, that feels really rare and refreshing. He has a new dynamic of wanting to become a Ghostbuster, his romance with Janine. Now look, I know a lot of us fans were all about Egon/Janine, especially for those who grew up with the animated series. The simple fact is, Harold Ramis apparently never liked those scenes or that dynamic, so it makes sense that he would write that out. Disappointing, but it is what it is. But I will say that there's another point in Moranis' favor, and Annie Potts too. It's how funny/cute they make this pairing. Yes, I'll always prefer the Egon and Janine relationship too, but if you gotta get rid of it, and Harold Ramis apparently said that we had to, this is a good substitute. And speaking of relationships, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Dana Barrett coming back. She and Peter continue to have great romantic chemistry and show off her excellent abilities as a straight man in comedy. Plus, it's a reason to have Sigourney Weaver in another one of these movies, and that's always a plus for me. Number 4. River of Mood Slime. You can basically describe the first film as a story where a Lovecraftian monster is trying to break into our world, and the movie treats the threat completely seriously in all things, with the heroes coming from a practically different genre and stopping them. Creating this awesome clash is what's at the heart of this franchise as a whole, so continuing from there, the River of Slime feels like an appropriate follow-up. The effects realizing it mostly hold up, and strangely enough, the slime itself actually starts to feel like a character itself. It's really hard to explain why or how the filmmakers pulled that off, but it's something that I've always felt since watching it as a kid. And of course, taking one of the biggest tenets of Supernatural up there with floating sheets and red eyes in the dark, it's just one of the most popular things that kids love playing with and are completely fascinated by. So it's really cool to see them make it such a major part of the film as opposed to just a background detail or atmosphere. Number 5. Vigo the New Villain. So, as I was writing this, the new trailer for Ghostbusters Afterlife was released. Nothing new in it to really change my overall opinion, until they showed Gozer and the Terror Dogs will also be returning. Now maybe this is my growing up with the animated series perspective poking through again, but isn't one of the major ideas of Ghostbusters as a franchise supposed to be busting ghosts, as in different ghosts, as in Each story is a new adventure for the heroes. The animated series famously had a rule of no recurring villains other than some very rare exceptions. Because if the same ghost keeps coming back, then they're not really busting any ghosts. You could make the argument that the video game did something like this, but the main villain turns out to be Ivo Shandor, who was name-dropped in the original film, but otherwise is a new, different threat, even if he is connected with Gozer. Also, Answer the Call, while connecting itself to the Destructor concept, and the post-credits scene mentioning Gozer, still largely had a unique bad guy for the franchise despite its issues. So really, I'm not sure with Ghostbusters II underperforming, more so critically than financially, and Answer the Call flat-out bombing, if the producers were snake-bitten and desperately afraid of doing any future Ghostbuster movies without Gozer, but either way, it's a shame. Point being with all that, I really like Vigo as a villain. He has a different style and method of trying to take over the world and gain power through the supernatural. The design of the costume and being dubbed by Max von Sydow all make him an intimidating villain. Well, I'm not going to get into the details, but if you want to Google it, you can, but knowing about the actor in real life kinda makes him even creepier and freaky of a bad guy. And even though I don't consider to be one of the true bad guys of the movie, since he's basically brainwashed throughout most of it, but where else do I put him? Peter McNichol is like having another Rick Moranis in this movie, almost stealing the movie away from Bill Murray. Number 6, a fun, feel-good climax. Dear God, you have no idea how much I want to be a fly in the wall when Ramis, Aykroyd, and Reitman are writing the script and someone at some point had to say, guys, I got how to end this movie. America saves the day. It's gotta be one of the most patriotic climaxes ever committed to film. And as a liberal, America-hating snowflake, I got no time for all that jingoistic crap, but even I'm like, America, fuck yeah! While watching this. But beyond all that, I think it's a clever subversion of the giant menace in the last film to actually be what is helping the Ghostbusters. Maybe part of that is my love of hope punk, but seeing the city be united by the feel-good vibes of the Statue of Liberty walking through the city as everyone sings along to Jackie Wilson's Higher and Higher just always leaves me with such a good feeling. And in the end, isn't that how any comedy, or especially a Ghostbusters movie, should leave you feeling? Conclusions. While it's not as good as Ghostbusters, but what else is, it's a damn fine sequel to a comedy classic. It's a shame Bill couldn't appreciate it, and even the rest of the cast and crew seem to view it as a misfire. Maybe it's from growing up and being able to watch both of these back to back and not having the incredible build-up allows me to view it in a more positive light. I think that this is a real fun movie that could have easily continued with spawning more Ghostbuster sequels, but circumstances made that not really happen. If you haven't rewatched it in a while, I'd say give it another try. Maybe you'll find that you like it better now, or if you've never seen it, I also gotta say, give it a try. It's nowhere near as bad as some people make it out to be, but that's just my opinion.